Perfect.
Lovely. Okay, so thanks for the introductions, Alex and Louisa. It's great to be with you. We're going to be talking about the right to be forgotten, and Alex was explaining that, you know, to look out for the key building blocks that make for a successful removal application and the timing and what things to consider. So before we move on to those specific points and questions, and for the purpose of the recording that might help other people at a later date, what I'm going to do is spend 4 or 5 minutes talking about the right to be forgotten, what Internet Erasure do as a standalone project, with the right to be forgotten, and the libel type of removals and the successes we've had. So as a brief introduction then, the right to be forgotten was introduced under the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulations, Article 17. It's unified across England, the UK and the EU. So it includes, you know, Italy and all the other territories of the EU as well as us. Also, many other countries around the world are bringing this in as well. So, you know, we have Canada coming online, Nigeria, Argentina, and it's in discussions in India. And eventually, I think we'll see this rolled out almost globally, because it's absolutely right and appropriate that people should be able to move on from their past and control their own data. And where something is irrelevant, out of date, inadequate, so it might be incomplete, missing key information, or excessive, you know, just too much of it dominating, so that's the only image someone gets, that people might get who are searching, then people have the right to apply for it to be removed. Now, how that applies to search engines is, so the larger search engines have quite an evolved process now. They're used to this, and they process thousands of applications, you know, daily or weekly, for people who want to have content that's no longer represents them or breaches their privacy, and that want them to be removed. So you can apply through quite a simple web form to Google, to Bing, or to Yahoo. And Google is 90% of UK search traffic, so it's the most important one. Bing and Yahoo are together 9% of search traffic, so together they're about 1/10 of the impact of Google. But the three of them together is 99% of people searching on the internet. You know, we will be capturing those or dealing with them. So the right to be forgotten, like I say, under certain conditions, allows someone to request that their data be deleted, or in these cases blocked, de-indexed, so that it no longer shows up in searches against their name. Now, if an article has John Smith and it also has Sally Fraser in the article, then it might be blocked for John Smith, but unless Sally Alexander makes right to be forgotten applications, that article will still come up for searches under her name. But in a lot of our cases, it's just dealing with one person. And for the relevance here, it's typically dealing with people who have criminal convictions, or in some cases, they may have been falsely accused and found not guilty, but the content still remains on the internet. Now, how long can things stay on the internet for? Well, one case that we're dealing with that's just come to us, the newspaper articles are from 1996. So 25 years this person's being punished with the content showing on the internet. Now, he had a 2-year prison sentence, and it was spent almost 2 decades ago, and yet he's still suffering from what we call enforced disclosure. Now, this man can go and apply for jobs and not have to disclose. He can apply for insurance and not have to disclose. He can apply for tenancies and not have to disclose. And yet Google thinks it's appropriate to tell the entire world that 25 years ago, this man made a mistake. So it's completely unacceptable. And of course, we're doing a lot of lobbying in that area as well, because it's simply wrong. A spent conviction should be removed from the internet without question upon application for searches under that person's name. Now, sometimes Google, Bing, Yahoo, they take it upon themselves to be judge in the matter of weighing up the public interest in a story and a case against that person's right to be forgotten or right to erasure. And if they decline the application, we then make an appeal to the Information Commissioner, who can actually enforce that right and say, no, this person does have the right to have them removed, and they can say to Google, Bing, or Yahoo, or any other search engine potentially, you know, you must block these from search. So that's the right to be forgotten in a nutshell. It doesn't always work, because if someone's only just been out of prison 2 months ago, and they've just started their license conditions, then they haven't necessarily demonstrated that what is on the internet is actually out of date. Now, that's not the only grounds for removal, but it's one of the main grounds. If we can evidence something is inaccurate, or like I mentioned, excessive, there's various other grounds we can argue that something should be removed under. But one of the main ones when it comes to convictions is it out of date? So, if someone got a fine, which is a spent conviction 1 year later, then 12 to 18 months later, that should be removed from the internet for searches under their name. But if it was, a life sentence prisoner who served 16 years in prison, and they've only just been released 6 months ago, then they haven't necessarily demonstrated that they're living a crime-free life and that the content on the internet is irrelevant and doesn't reflect them as a person anymore. And therefore, applications might not succeed at the first time, and we might need to keep trying. So that's what we do. We will keep trying, and you can make as many applications as you like, and potentially, do it every 6 months, 12 months, or whatever. Yeah, Alex, please. Yeah. You're muted.
Sorry, Phil, you mentioned that the main kind of application, the main kind of question is it out of date? I was just wondering, for people whose convictions are never spent, so currently in terms of 4 years and above, I know that there's a white paper where that kind of may be changed in the coming year, but I was kind of wondering, what would be the dividing line of ranking something as out of date if their conviction is not going to be spent?
Yes, so that's an excellent question. And we do a lot of work with people with unspent convictions. And there's a number of arguments we can have. And let's go back to that life sentence prisoner, actually, who served 16 years. I would say that we have a really strong case when that person's been released from prison and he's done 2 or 3 years on license successfully. Because he's demonstrated that he's living a crime-free life. He might be working, he might be trying to rebuild his family life, and looking to rent property and being discriminated against every step of the way because of this enforced disclosure. So when it's appropriate to disclose, of course, that person will disclose to his potential employer, and he'll make various disclosures as and when they're legally necessary. But it's not necessary, and it's not right for a neighbour to know what happened in that person's life 20 years ago, because that person's then treating him different and judging him differently, and yet we all change over the years 20 years later. So in that case, we would say that the links are disproportionate, and they're affecting this person's ability to live his right to privacy and to live a crime-free life, and yet he's proven, despite these links, for 2 or 3 years, as that life sentence prisoner, that he can live crime-free and contribute to the community in work. And maybe he's defeated his alcoholism or drug addiction, or was the cause of the addiction. So we have all these various arguments that this now is the person, and we would expect those to be removed. Yes, Alex?
Sorry, Phil, you probably get the gist.
No, it's okay.
I'm a person for questions. I guess another thought that's come to my mind for individuals, like I'm thinking about young men who may want to break the cycle of gang involvement, for instance, and oftentimes some of the news articles that is written about violent offences can put a person at risk for kind of reprisals by other groups of guys.
Yes. Are
there kind of arguments that we could? Because I'm kind of thinking, if the key argument is it's spent, there are other. I'm guessing there are other factors where actually
yes,
there should be things that supersede that. And I guess my second question is, do Google kind of come back and kind of say, give us evidence? Because I'm kind of wondering if you've lost your job because someone's done a Google search and you've been given the job, and then they kind of say, actually, it's reputational damage to the organization, but you have no way of kind of knowing as the individual that they've kind of done that, and you haven't got any kind of proof except anecdotally. How do you fight that?
Yes. So let's come to your first question, which is other factors that can influence removal. And personal safety, or the safety of family members, is absolutely one of them. In fact, the big success we had recently, which was 24 links of an unspent conviction, and it was only about 22 months earlier that the publicity had occurred. So it's an unspent conviction. And we successfully removed them all. And one of the arguments for this was the disproportionate impact on the children and the safety to the family. So Google made, in my opinion, the right decision to block all of those links, because that impact was so disproportionate. And in the case of a young gang member, as you say, who served a prison sentence, got out, maybe he's done 3 years in prison and has 3 years on license still to serve, then yes, that's an, if he is in fear of his life or in fear of reprisals, that's a very strong argument, definitely. You see, the public interest is really the only defense that the search engines have. And I often have to argue with them that the public interest doesn't mean what the public is interested in. It means, does it serve the public to have them published? That's what in the public interest means. It doesn't mean what nosy neighbours are interested in, which a lot of people would think it means. It means, does it benefit the public to see this news article? Now, some articles are genuinely in the public interest, and some of the more challenging ones to remove would surprise you. It may be more challenging to remove a case of benefit fraud, although not impossible, compared to a case of extreme violence, because there is a feeling that the deterrent needs to be very lot of publicity around the idea that if someone commits benefit fraud, you need to know that you've got a high risk of going to prison or getting a suspended sentence. Whereas the public probably already know that if you commit an extreme act of violence, you're going to prison. So so the public interest actually can sometimes be surprising, depending on the cases. And yes, but a lot of it is about proportionality. So 24 links about one incident, that when a person has a huge trail of other content, about them on the internet, which is positive stuff. Those 22 links are the first thing that someone sees when they Google, and that is disproportionate, and that's not appropriate, and especially if it puts the family or them in danger. So I don't care if it's a spent or unspent conviction, we will make the applications. So
Phil, taking that point in mind, would you say then, if somewhat, because I'm thinking about a person in particular who this is very relevant for, and he's got a conviction for fraud, I'm guessing those ones are, maybe kind of hard to kind of, they may be seen as strong public interest. Is that right?
Well, no, like I say, it depends on what the fraud is. So it seems to be fraud against the government is really up there with, we're going to fight tooth and nail to keep that on there. Fraud against the government or the DWP. But so a person who maybe received a sexual conviction, which is very controversial, and maybe they maintained their innocence, and yet they're still struggling many, many years later, and they're having to move every 6 months because of violent reprisals, and their name being all over various websites and shared everywhere. That would be a very easy one to remove in comparison. So it really depends. And people might say, well, why would you want that removed from the internet? Because we should be able to know. And the truth is, if you have a legitimate right to know, you can know. You can ring up the police and say, I want to activate Sarah's law because a new man's moved in next door and I've got 2 young children and I want to know if he's got a history of sexual activity or paedophile or whatever. And under Sarah's law, the police will tell you, and you must keep it confidential. If you don't keep it confidential and you tell someone else, then that's you can be held in contempt of court. So before the information's released, it's confidential to you. When you have a legitimate reason to know, you can speak to the police and say, under Sarah's law, I want to know if there's a paedophile living in my street. You can find that out. If you are a lady and you start a relationship with a new man, rather than relying on Google that may or may not be accurate, you can ring up the police and say, can you tell me under Claire's law if this man has ever been a domestic abuser, please? And the police will tell you under the domestic abuse disclosure scheme, if this person, your potential partner who you're falling in love with, has ever been violent towards any other in any other domestic settings. You see, so you have legitimate channels to find out disclosure. If you're an employer, you have DBS checks, or you can ask, for disclosure of unspent convictions. But my point is, it shouldn't be on Google and the search engines for any nosy curtain twitcher to find out just because they're want to know what's going on, and and they like a bit of gossip. No, that's not appropriate, because the impact is too huge. And it lasts for many years, long after a sentence. And everyone we deal with, apart from about 80 people in prison, no one actually has a whole life tariff, apart from those 80 odd people in prison. And the point is, the judge sets a sentence and there's a license period, and after that they have served their punishment. And yet so many people are getting this potentially life sentence or decades of a sentence for their mistakes, that range from very minor literally crazy little things, all the way up to the more serious offences. And the judge sets the punishment, and that's what the punishment should be. That's our opinion. So people can take matters in their own hands with the right to be forgotten. It's free. There's no fees involved. They can submit the applications to the search engines, and they can escalate it as complaints to the Information Commissioner. They can do that themselves, or much like getting a hair cut or laying a patio, you can instruct professionals to do it if you'd rather. So, we support people who want to do it. They feel the skill and they're able to do it, or if they've got the funds or the resources, or they're supported, then they can pay us to do it for them if they'd rather. So that's the first main thing we do, is the right to be forgotten. But alongside that, we also have the ability, again, everybody has this, the ability to reach out to publishers directly. You can do that under libel legislation if something is inaccurate, or if it breaches your privacy. They're using photos that they took from Facebook, they're disclosing your address, these sorts of things. They're putting other family members at risk. There's lots of reasons you can reach out to a publisher directly and just email or write to the editor at swindonnews.com and say, this article that you published about me is causing disproportionate damage. This was happening in my life. Now, again, in many cases, editors will refuse to remove, but in other cases, usually they can be quite reasonable and edit the articles. So they may publish a correction, or they edit out sensitive information or anything that's not actually proven. Sometimes at the time, journalists might run away with themselves and actually write things that weren't fact in court. And if they're not fact, or they're controversial in any way, they can be removed or edited out. You have 12 months technically under libel law, 12 months from publication. So the sooner the better with that, with the libel side of it. Whereas with right to be forgotten, the older it is, the better. So, but we still reach out. We've got one removed recently from a small local media outlet. It was 10 years old. It was an embarrassing matter for the lady concerned. She'd had various financial challenges. It was a small fraud conviction that she ended up with. And of course, it was a spent conviction. And we reached out to the publisher rather than reaching out to the search engines. And actually, within such a short space of time, about an hour and a half, 90 minutes, the article was deleted permanently from the internet. Now, of course, that's even better than getting it blocked from search engines, because even if someone has a link to it, they can't access it. It's gone for good. And literally, it was one email, follow-up phone call, gone. And that was the right thing to do. Now, what if they don't do it? If they refuse or they're unreasonable, then again, you have recourse. And in that case, it's not the Information Commissioner, it's the IPSO, which is the Independent Press Standards Organisation. And if they refuse to be cooperative or delete it, you can escalate it as a complaint to the Independent Press Standards Organisation. And again, typically they say it's a 12-month window, but as long as there's a decent reason, a legitimate reason for it being outside of 12 months. For example, you were incarcerated at the time, struggling with mental health problems, whatever it happened, struggling to get the evidence required, whatever it might be. There's no harm in making applications to IPSO that are out of time. But like I say, I actually generally find that most of the publishers have good, very good evolved procedures in place for the deletion of articles or the editing of articles. And, you know, so in most cases, if there's 2 or 3 articles on the internet, I would start with direct approaches first, and that will save all the time with the search engines potentially. And again, it's something you can do yourself, no cost involved, or you can hand it to professionals, you know, who've done many applications like this and who are quite persistent on your behalf. So whatever really suits you best. So really, you've got 4 strings to your bow, really. It's not just the right to be forgotten. You know, you've got a couple of other organizations backing you up, and you've got the direct approaches as well. So yeah.
Phil, just want to firstly say thank you so much. Like within 20 minutes, like my mind has just been kind of, you know, open. I only thought it was just, you know, approaching the search engines. I didn't actually know of some of the other things. So it's actually, you've really helped us to give us some steers. And I think just for, I guess, for the purpose of the recording, could you just give a plug to